For as long as there have been people in Newfoundland and Labrador, there has been mining. Pre-contact peoples quarried stone for a variety of uses. Chert made excellent projectile points for harpoons and other weapons. Soapstone was softer, and it could be carved into a wide range of objects, like cooking pots, oil lamps, and figurines. When European explorers arrived at Newfoundland and Labrador in the 1500s, they also noticed that the land held valuable minerals. They returned home with reports of copper, iron, lead, pyrite, silver. But centuries would pass before the first commercial mines started operating. And when they did, they had a shaky start. In 1776, a small copper mine opened at Shoal Bay. Most of the ore was located offshore, so the miners had to tunnel beneath the sea floor. Flooding was a recurring problem. So were the high costs associated with submarine drilling. The mine closed 2 years after it opened. A string of small mines sprang up across the island in the coming years, but most were inconsequential. Almost a century would go by before the first large-scale mine opened in Newfoundland. In 1857, a prospector named Smith Mackay discovered large copper deposits at Tilt Cove in Notre Dame Bay. He needed money to develop his find, so he approached a well-known businessman and politician named Charles Fox Bennett. Together, the two established the Union Mining Company. Blasting began on July 27, 1864. The results were encouraging. The quality of the ore was good, and there was enough of it to sustain a mining operation that would last for half a century. What was once a fishing community of just 3 families in 1863 transformed itself into a mining town of almost 800 people by the end of the decade. Employment was steady, wages were good, and demand for copper was high on the international market. The town prospered so much that the colony honored it with a stamp in 1897. It was the first stamp in the world that featured miners. The Tilt Cove copper boom attracted scores of prospectors to Notre Dame Bay. By the end of the 1800s, about 24 copper mines had opened in the region at places like Betts Cove, Little Bay, Pilley's Island, and Fortune Harbor. Notre Dame Bay was so productive that Newfoundland became the 6th largest copper producer on the planet in the 1880s. But the First World War changed everything. The cargo space once used to ship copper to market was now needed to send troops and supplies overseas. German U-boats compounded the problem by destroying hundreds of Allied merchant vessels. Freight rates rose dramatically, and it became almost impossible for Newfoundland's copper mines to make a profit. By the time the war ended in 1918, the Tilt Cove mine and many others in Notre Dame Bay had closed. But on the other side of the island, there was another development that would last for nearly a century. The Bell Island iron ore deposits were discovered by a fisherman named Jabez Butler. He used some loose stone from the island to ballast his boat, and he noticed that it was laden with iron. Butler and his sons took out a mineral license in 1892, but they didn't have enough money to start a mining operation on their own. So they leased the claim to the Nova Scotia Steel and Coal Company in 1894. The company started mining the site 1 year later. At first, miners worked above ground to extract the ore that was closest to the Earth's surface. But in 1905, the men had to tunnel underground and then beneath the ocean floor to reach more distant deposits. Early each morning, the men went underground, wearing candles on their hats to light their way. After 8 or 10 hours of drilling, blasting, and shoveling rock, they returned above ground, coated in the red dust of the mines. It was hard, physical, dirty work. And it was dangerous. Dynamite sometimes detonated at the wrong time, maiming some men and killing others. Runaway ore cars also claimed lives. Of all the mines in Newfoundland, Bell Island's had the highest accident rate. But it was a boon to the economy. The Bell Island iron ore deposits were vast and of a high quality. Much of it was sold to steel mills in Nova Scotia, but it was also shipped to more distant places like the United States and Germany. The mines employed hundreds of local workers, and they helped to establish the mining town of Wabana. The population increased from about 700 in 1891 to more than 6,000 in 1935. By the time the mines closed in 1966, they had produced about 81 million tons of iron ore. Ten years after the Bell Island mines opened, rich mineral deposits surfaced in central Newfoundland, but decades would pass before they were developed. In 1905, the Anglo-Newfoundland Development Company acquired exclusive timber, water, and mineral rights to 6,000 square kilometers of land in central Newfoundland. The company was primarily interested in the forests, but it also hired prospectors to search for mineral deposits in its holdings. One of them was a local guide and hunter named Matty Mitchell. He found ore that contained a mixture of zinc, lead, copper, and gold on the banks of the Buchans River. The company gave him $2.50 for his discovery. It was about enough to buy a barrel of flour. The find was significant, but 2 decades would go by before it was developed. The technology needed to separate the zinc, lead, and other minerals from one another didn't exist until 1925. It was developed by the American Smelting and Refining Company, which partnered with the Anglo-Newfoundland Development Company to mine the Buchans site. The mine opened in 1927, and the company established the town of Buchans to accommodate workers. As the mine prospered, so too did the town. Its population climbed from 0 in 1905 to about 2,000 in 1945. But living in a company town created problems for its residents. The American Smelting and Refining Company owned all of the town's houses and buildings. Workers weren't allowed to build their own homes. If they were single, they had to live in company-owned bunkhouses. Married couples could live in cottages. Rent was cheap, but the dwellings were cramped and poorly maintained. When the Department of Agriculture and Mines sent a committee to Buchans in 1929 to investigate living and working conditions, officials were shocked to learn that each bunkhouse bed had to accommodate 2 workers. The company didn't provide mattresses for the men, who instead had to share double box springs. Cottages provided better living conditions, but there weren't enough of them to go around. Some married couples had no choice but to live apart. The company also owned the railroad track connecting Buchans to Millertown. It was the only way in or out of the town until the 1950s. This gave company officials extraordinary powers over their employees. They not only controlled where the workers lived, but also regulated who could enter the town and who could leave it. When a road to Badger was completed in 1956, many employees left the town and built their own homes across the river on land the company didn't own. Despite these tensions, the Buchans mine thrived. Before it closed in 1984, it produced approximately 17.5 million tons of ore. Other mines also opened in Newfoundland during the first half of the 20th century. These included a limestone quarry at Aguathuna and a fluorspar mine at St. Lawrence. All of these new mines attracted workers from across the colony, but none of them experienced the same level of growth and prosperity as the Bell Island and Buchans mines.